for the Selling Agile to Senior Managers, and that you can all see the screen and you can all see the slides. I think we should have a special welcome right now to the new logo and the new branding for the Agile Business Consortium. For those of you who might have been a bit confused, it was the DSDM Consortium up to a few weeks ago, and they are the owners of Agile PM, and they're the owners of Agile Program Management, and hopefully soon to be Agile Portfolio Management as well. So let's get on. My name's Melanie. I implement Agile for a living. I don't think I ever implement the same style of Agile twice, and the reason I'm delivering this webinar about selling Agile to senior managers is because simply that's a key part of my role. We can only get so far when we're delivering Agile within single teams, even within multiple teams, but within a particular area of the business, before we start to butt up against the need for a much greater support from senior management to the overall way of Agile working. So what you're seeing in this webinar came out of the roadshow that I did at the Agile Business Conference a few weeks ago, where there was lots of input from lots of people. So if you're one of them, thank you very much. We had some really good discussions, and hopefully these are some of the key pointers that I've learned the hard way over the last few years that I think are really important. Before I get started, you can see who I am. I'd like to know a little bit about you. So in theory, I'm now going to ask you some poll questions. I have absolutely no idea how to do this, so we'll find out in a moment. I'm afraid that's obviously not going to work. If any of my friends that are organising the webinar can hear me right now, I'm happy for you to take over as an organiser and run the poll for me. Right, so you can all see the first question then. Are you working in an Agile way that perhaps been sort of decided by you and your team rather than perhaps by sort of senior management? So it's basically about half of you are working in an Agile way. So I'm going to guess that the other half of you are interested in Agile but aren't quite there yet. So that's really good, thank you very much. And perhaps we can run the second poll question now. My excellent friends who are organising behind the scenes are doing a brilliant job. So this poll question was, I was just trying to get a feel for whether or not you have any qualifications in Agile and how far down your Agile journey you are. It's always difficult with the poll questions, it's just yes or no, but even from this I can see that just under perhaps 2/3 of you have got some kind of Agile qualification. So some of the things I'm going to talk about are familiar. It's quite interesting that more of you have qualifications and are working in an Agile way. So that tells me, I think, quite a lot already. Okay, right, let's get on then. What I plan to do, I'm going to look at some of the key aspects, and these are the sort of lessons learned over the years. So we'll look at assuming no knowledge, not going into detail, not saying it's the only way, and quite a lot of being empathetic with senior managers and what's driving them and what their concerns are. And towards the end, we'll have a little bit on nudging towards a move for Agile. Any questions that you've got, please fire away. We're going to pick those up at the end. And as you've seen my technical competence already, I expect my friends behind the scenes will help me pick them up at the end. But we'll certainly have a look at all of your questions. Okay then, so first lesson learned, when you are trying to sell Agile to senior managers, assume no knowledge. Now that means, first of all, that it would be really sensible to sort of start to listen first, ask questions, because I think the most important thing to say is that don't confuse no sort of knowledge with no opinion. I think that there is an awful lot written about Agile that seeps into the minds of senior managers, even if they're not running any kind of Agile environment, even if it's not something they know a great deal about. I think organisational Agile and Agile environment, certainly if you start to look at things like Financial Times or the Harvard Business Review or the McKinsey Quarterly, or all the sorts of things that at a very senior level, the publications that perhaps that audience tends to read, all you hear is Agile is a good thing, Agile is a competitive advantage, but with a very much a slant that Agile is about fast delivery, Agile is about fast to market, Agile is about very flexible, responding to change. In my experience, unfortunately, we start the Agile discussion with the perception in the background that Agile is about ultimately cost cutting, because it's a way of doing more for less. It's a way of doing things more quickly. So I think it is really worth sort of thinking about what are the perceptions behind the scenes. Know your audience. Never ever start to get into a selling job unless you know your audience and build a rapport with them. And so I think a few things to say. There are key elements perhaps we want to get across that are nothing to do with technical knowledge about Agile per se, but is about understanding the sort of the Agile approach we have. And the first is that when it comes down to working more collaboratively, and I think this is a very powerful message because an awful lot of executives recognise it, we are now talking about the business and the project teams working together, not business versus project. The reason I think it's such a powerful message is that I know an awful lot of senior managers who have been concerned or even burnt by the fact that projects have been undertaken in their organisation. The project team has gathered all the requirements up front, gone quiet while they do all of the development and testing, and then they've got their deliverables and they sort of throw them over the wall to operational staff and say, hey, get on with this, here's your new system. And that's never a recipe for success, mainly because often what happens at that point is that the users then say, no, that's not what we meant when we gave you the requirements, or no, things have moved on, this won't work for us anymore. And so I think this business and project message, that it's going to be a far more collaborative working pattern, is a key thing to address. I think also that we ought to address it fairly early on, because it's one of the biggest challenges, because we're now saying, by the way, we're going to need your involvement in the projects, and therefore we're going to need you to commit a bit more time to the projects. So it isn't a fire and forget thing that we used to do when we asked for your requirements, then we went away. So there's an awful lot in those two sentences up on the screen there, and a key set of messages that I think you want to deliver. I think the next one is that what you can expect from Agile is more frequent delivery. So the key thing we want to get across is that we're going to deliver more than one version of our project deliverables. We're not going to make you wait to the end. We're going to evolve the solution by giving you perhaps a skinnier version of what you asked for, without all the exciting bells and whistles. But then as we go through the life cycle, we'll add more and then some more. So it's this idea of just getting on the table that with this style of project management, you're not waiting to the very end of a project. Now, that's a very powerful message, again, for senior executives who are funding project teams. I was in a briefing yesterday where I kept saying, but I'm funding you for 9 months. What am I getting during those 9 months? You're telling me I just have to sit here and wait for stuff and magically it will appear at the end of 9 months? That's not an appealing message, certainly not for executives. So I think who are all about achievement focus. So I think that idea of early return on investment is quite important. And then I think this is critical, because often when we talk about the fact that executives do have quite a perception and an opinion of Agile, one of the things that they may have heard is that, well, we'll evolve the solution, but we're not quite sure what we're going to deliver to you, but we'll deliver stuff and we'll sort of make it up as we go along. And we know that isn't the truth. Although the detail of what we're going to deliver is based on feedback, we do agree the scope of the work up front, and we do agree a deadline up front. So we do know what success looks like before we start work. And I think it is getting across that message that Agile is not the Wild West, and that it isn't a complete free-for-all, and that there is some structure behind it, is a very important message up front. So when we talk about assume no knowledge, these are the key things I would suggest. One of my biggest learning points, because I feel like I've been on every Agile course going, I have every Agile qualification from all the different practitioners. I love Agile PM because it gives us that project management wrapper, but I'm also a certified Scrum Master. I've also done Lean Kanban, I've done Safe 4, all these sorts of things. But the one thing I've learned is that none of that material gives you what you need, because it is not aimed at executives, it is aimed at practitioners. So whatever course material you might have to sort of start this story, just remember you're going to have to step it up a level, and you're going to have to give much broader brush strokes, which I think leads us into the next one, which is don't go into detail. I think that when we go into detail, and probably the worst thing of all is all this terminology up here on the screen, is that as soon as you start to go into that terminology, you create the impression that this is quite significant, this is quite complex, this is quite specialist, and we're going to have to get some specialists on board, and we're going to have to hire contractors who really know their stuff, and this isn't going to be easy to adopt. And already you've sort of created the impression that this is some specialist approach that really you're going to have to carefully understand and learn how it all works. And therefore the barriers go up. And you think, well, heavens, this isn't worth doing. So I think that the implication that there's a whole new language to learn and a whole new set of terminology can create this impression that it's quite a narrow specialism. And therefore the argument goes, well, this is a narrow thing, we don't want to pursue this because it's probably just a trend and there'll be something else along pretty soon. So stay away from terminology, and when you are using terminology, have worked out ahead of time what perhaps, a simpler, more business-focused example of that is. I mean, I'm always joking with my groups that, retrospective, well, that's what we call reviews these days. It's just making a joke of the fact that, it's the same, same concepts but slightly different wording. When we talk about a stand-up, we're just talking about, getting together in a huddle around a flip chart so that everybody's sort of standing up and giving a very short summary of where they're up to. So turn it into English, turn it into business-friendly language. And again, this links to something else, which is it's really important, I think, to recognise that Agile is not the only method or structure or set of procedures out there. If we think about the fact that we're selling to senior management, senior managers are usually middle-aged and older. It's just the way of the world. And it means, though, that they've seen probably quite a few different approaches. I'm quite old. I've been in business for nearly 30 years, and some of the things that I've put up on here sort of represent my own history. Because I remember in the mid to late 1980s, everyone was talking about business process re-engineering, and actually how we did lots and lots of Postit Notes to identify what are all the steps in a process and how could we streamline it. Well, I know and you know that today we probably call that Lean. In the late 1980s, we called that BPR, Business Process Reengineering. So things come and go. We used to be interested in things like total quality management. Well, I'm not sure that died a death, but certainly not everybody knows TQM anymore. Prince 2 was how we used to manage projects at the beginning of this century, and that was the sort of dominant approach. You see things like cybersecurity are now also on the list, emotional intelligence. The plan, do, check, act issue is one way that people sort of look at that and think, yeah, actually this Agile stuff is very similar to that stuff, and they can align it back to different thinkers like Deming, for example, and they go, oh, it's the same thing. And as soon as you can align it back to other things that they recognise, they get incredibly comfortable. One of the things, though, that goes down incredibly badly is that sort of dictatorial approach, which is that Agile is the only possible solution to the problems that we currently have, and that Agile is the only way to manage our work more effectively. Because again, that just puts the barriers up, and because it's effectively telling managers that all of the other things that they know about are now being dismissed. And frankly, nobody likes that. Nobody likes to feel redundant in terms of the way we work. So put it into context. Don't be one of those sort of Agile purists, because Agile purists are not going to be able to sell this. You have to be what I refer to as an Agile pragmatist, because not only do you have to say that Agile isn't the only way, but I think you also have to think about how your organisation works. What are the standards, the procedures, the brands or methods that are perhaps used by your organisation? And do you have an answer for how Agile knits into and aligns with those other things? Because at the merest hint that there is a need to throw everything else out if we adopt Agile, and you can start to see that the selling message will lose its impact. Agile, in that circumstance, just becomes a problem. You think, oh, we're not going to touch that because it's going to unravel everything else. So I think those of us who are trying to persuade senior management that Agile can work, and I've got a board meeting coming up where I got the agenda for that yesterday and the key things they want to ask me, and funnily enough, there sat right in the middle is how can we use more traditional waterfall approaches alongside this new Agile thing? Because what they're saying is we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, and it is my job to make sure that I can explain how Agile aligns to everything that's already in existence. It might tune a few things up, but I have to have that answer. How does it align? Now let's get on to the section around being empathetic, because I think that what we mean by empathy is that you have to walk in the shoes of your customers, if you like, and if you're trying to make a sale, any salesperson will tell you you've got to connect to the interests and concerns of those you're selling to. So you've actually got to get under the skin of what people are really thinking, what they're feeling, what they're hearing, what they're saying, and actually link Agile back to their actual concerns. On this first slide, we talk about aligning Agile to corporate objectives. In the next one, we'll talk about aligning Agile to their management concerns. And then finally, we'll look at how Agile is an approach that perhaps can increase the capability of the organisation. But these are broad brushstrokes, but they are three things that perhaps senior managers are more aware of, and something that they are more concerned with is overarching. They are concerned about the overall capability of their organisation and whether or not their organisation is meeting its strategic objectives, because ultimately that's what they're employed to do. And if you look at any of their own performance criteria, their own KPIs, you'll see a lot in there, not only of the financials, but also of the strategy and how much they've contributed to the achievement of strategy. So we need to put it in terms that say, do you know what? This will help you achieve your objectives, and ultimately that will go down well. So again, what we're talking about in terms of corporate objectives, there tend to be three. There are always three. Does what you're proposing increase our revenue? Does what you're proposing save us costs? And does what you're proposing add value? It's really simple. I've worked in organisations all over the world, and however you translate it, the world boils down to these three corporate objectives at the end of the day. So let's sort of concentrate on the sort of the revenue one, to be fair. Now, let's be honest, using Agile I don't think is necessarily going to make any particular initiative earn more revenue, but of course what it does do is perhaps it gives us the opportunity to bring that revenue stream in earlier, because what we're going to do is we're going to deliver earlier in the life cycle. We're going to deliver early, but maybe a skinny version, and then what we're going to do is we're going to add to that. So there's a couple of benefits that are directly linked through to revenue that can really excite senior management about the possibilities that Agile offers them. So I think it's that return on investment begins early in the life cycle and then continues through the life cycle. So we build up those the revenue, which actually then ameliorates the cost that we're spending on the project to begin with. So you can sort of by halfway through a project, if it's run on Agile lines, get to a sort of cost neutral project because it's brought in as much revenue as we've actually spent so far, which is a very nice place to be. I think the other benefit around early delivery is actual protection of the revenue stream, because what we're talking about here is getting our ideas out into the market faster. Now, if you are in a corporate situation where we are talking about competitors, then what you're saying is that you are going to be able to build brand loyalty before they do, because you've launched before they have. So it's going to give you a solid base of sales and therefore a solid base of revenue ahead of a competitor launch. And that might actually deter them from entering the market at all, or at least it means that you're pushing their costs up and reducing their margin, because they're going to have to spend an awful lot more on sales and marketing to catch up with you. I think if you're looking at this from a perspective of a not-for-profit or a public sector organisation, then we may not be talking about revenue, but what we are talking about is levels of service and customer satisfaction. And of course, if you can put something out there that solves a problem for your customers early, then you're going to delight them. Instead of telling them constantly they have to wait for something to be fixed, if you can get something out there that makes how they interact with you easier, then you're going to be on a winner. It's the same kind of thing. So revenue might not appeal to all organisations, but if you replace revenue with customer satisfaction as the main measure, I think the arguments remain the same. There is earlier return on investment. You get either the revenue or the customer satisfaction earlier in the project life cycle. So I think that Agile does meet those kinds of corporate objectives. I think in terms of does Agile save costs, I think we have to be quite careful, because you know what it's like, otherwise we end up in a sort of cycle where we're sort of cutting project resources, and that's not what I'm trying to encourage in any way, because I think we've all got a role to play. But I think where we are saving costs is we are saving costs perhaps on the administration of an initiative, because we are not doing a lot of wasted effort associated with sort of waterfall work. It's all very well getting detailed requirements up front, but that costs a lot of money. That entire sort of exercise where we have to go out and survey and interview and meet with people. But then turning that into a detailed plan, well, that's great, but we've always known that detailed planning after the first few weeks or a couple of months becomes quite wasted effort, because other changes have overtaken us and we have to keep replanning. So we are saving costs in terms of we're not wasting resource up front doing lots of detailed planning, and we haven't got that wasted cost running all the way through the project life cycle, because we're actually doing some more on-the-fly planning as we need to. It's far more just-in-time planning, and it's not wasted effort. I think there's something else which, again, you'll have to think quite carefully about how you track it in your own organisations, but there is that underlying cost saving around not building the wrong things, not spending money on projects where at the end of the project life cycle the deliverables are handed over to a part of the business who then say, no, actually that's not what we meant, or no, things have moved on and we don't need this anymore. I've got lots of examples where that has in some cases cost millions, and the executives connected with that have often lost their jobs. We know that as part of the deliver early, we're getting an earlier feedback cycle with our customers, and we know that because what we're trying to do in evolving the solution involves a more collaborative approach, we're getting a lot of involvement with our customers. So we are minimising the risk that we are building the wrong thing and that we're using our resources in the wrong place. So I don't think you can actually sit there and sort of say, hey, this will slash project costs per se, but what you can say is that we're actually getting more value for money from our project resources because they're doing more of the right things and they're doing more delivery and a lot less wasted effort on planning up front. And I think the third one I've sort of talked about generally is that, you know, we are sort of saying, are we getting greater levels of customer satisfaction? Well, I think that we talk about more customer involvement, we talk about delivering to customers earlier, but for me there is something fundamental about if you're going to work in an agile way and you're going to evolve the solution, the one thing that has to happen is that everybody involved has to have a really good understanding of what we mean by business value. What value is it that we're delivering to our customers? And that real understanding of what it makes commercial sense, what is it that our customers are asking for, means that, you know, every team member is encouraged to challenge their work and to ensure that what they're doing is not just going through the motions, but that it really adds some kind of value, that they're working on a feature or function that is genuinely needed, and that they can see how it fits into the overall deliverable. And I think the big advantage for the organisation, although it's hard to quantify, I still think it's very much a benefit, is that it deepens and broadens the base of people who are actively contributing value. Because we're now, you know, we're all business analysts now. We're all people who are sort of trying to evaluate, is this relevant, is this useful? And we're not people who just take instructions and build whatever we're asked to build. At a much wider level, when I've done agile implementations and I look back and think, what's the difference? What have I done? I think culturally one of the things I've done is I've actually brought a connection between people who work in the organisation and what the organisation is supposed to be in business for. And I think that ultimately means that we do less wasted work and we do more targeted effort. So I think we're moving away from that traditional model where perhaps the team are waiting for the manager to tell them what work to do. All of the challenge and us working out what the work is, well, that has to sort of be in alignment with we have a really good understanding of what the commercial value is. So I think there's an awful lot you can say. Now, clearly you're going to put this in relevance of your own organisation, but start by looking at what are the strategic, the corporate objectives, and actually start to build a bigger narrative about how does Agile help you get there. Hopefully what you've heard from me is shown you how Agile is very supportive of corporate objectives, although you can probably also hear that it's not always a direct relationship. It's not going to immediately increase revenue. There's several steps leading to this improvement, and that's what I think you have to concentrate on when you're trying to sell Agile, is you have to build that sort of bigger narrative, that wider narrative that connects the dots for people. You can't just walk in the door and say Agile will do X, Y, and Z and it will be brilliant. I think you have to walk people through it a little bit more slowly. I love this. I do think this is fun because I think it shows, you know, that inability to delegate and that desire to sort of stay in control. And I think that Agile actually gives us an answer to probably one of the less articulated, but certainly quite an important sort of concern at senior management level. Certainly I sit in boardrooms, I'm an advisor to several boards where there is this sort of underlying concern about how we lead resources, in particularly in sort of knowledge work, where the resources really understand what they're doing, but as managers and senior leaders, we don't understand their work. When we were coming up through the ranks, the jobs that they're doing now simply didn't exist. So we've never had an opportunity to really get under the hood and understand exactly what it is they do. So we employ programmers, we employ developers, we employ marketeers, digital marketeers these days, where there's an awful lot of us who were sort of learning our craft more than 25 years ago, where those jobs didn't exist and we don't know exactly what's involved, and yet we're supposed to manage them. You can start to see now, can't you, that the logic of micromanagement and the logic of top-down control simply doesn't fit. It doesn't fit in a fast-moving world, but it also doesn't fit in a world where you are managing resources who know far more about their jobs than you're ever going to learn. So I think Agile, in the widest sense, because we're talking about self-empowered teams, we're talking about self-directed teams, actually gives us an answer to the 21st century leadership dilemma, which is how do I lead effectively when I cannot give detailed instructions? Well, it's very simple. You move away from that micromanagement, and actually what you get into is a recognition that perhaps it's our leadership job to build an environment where people feel supported and are able to take risks, where people feel it's very straightforward to get further support or coaching, and where people feel that senior leaders are very much available to solve the bigger problems and to perhaps smooth the path, and that we'll deal with lots of the political challenges and we'll deal with a lot of the senior level stakeholder engagement for them, so that what we need to do is build a sort of clarity between what senior managers can offer in an agile environment and what those working more on the sort of cold face of the customers can actually offer. So there's the detailed work, and then sort of identifying at the senior level that leaders are there to get rid of all of the problems. So I think what we have to emphasise is that Agile comes with a sort of management structure. It comes with this idea of, you know, teams are expected to be given an objective, but that they are expected to be recognised as experts in their field who can then break that objective down into very detailed work and organise that work in the way that best suits them to deliver on time. And I think that's something that we probably ought to bring up as a theme that runs all the way through this, is that deliver on time is a key control within Agile. So there are some built-in there's built-in governance, if you like, there's built-in constraints, because we're not talking about just doing any old work. We're talking about, we agree the scope up front in the wider context, and senior management are a part of that, a very important part, that team members are encouraged to challenge the business value of everything they're doing all of the way through, and that team members are required to deliver on time. And in fact, we have a whole schematic which is about delivering on time, from sprints or time boxes at a couple of weeks in duration, and then bringing that into the wider sort of increment that we'll deliver. And then, of course, that brings us into the project as a whole being delivered on time. So you can delegate, you can be free to say, I respect my team members, I respect their skill base, let them get on with it. And I think that's absolutely fine because we have the controls in place. So a thread that has to run through, and I didn't make it a specific slide because I think it can turn people off, but what I'm talking about is that magical word about governance. And there is enough governance in Agile approaches to make it trustworthy and to say, actually, this is an approach that can work and we can use it. But certainly for me, in the widest context, it gives a whole new sort of set of examples of how do we manage those knowledge workers who know more than we know. I think we ought to look at this idea of, again, the wider sort of objectives that underpin senior management, is that they do have this sort of concern on their shoulders about building the wider capability of the organisation. In technical terms, we're supposed to always be keeping an eye out on succession planning, but I think we're also supposed to be looking at, well, if in a world which is so fast moving, the skills and knowledge of our staff are actually our biggest competitive advantage. What we're always trying to do, I think, at the wider sense, is we're trying to build capability so that whatever ideas we come up with, we'll actually be able to take them through from idea into successful implementation as quickly as possible. So what we're looking for here is skilled staff. I mean, how many companies that do you work for which are always said to say, people are our competitive advantage, people are our secret sauce, you know, it's the people in our organisation that make us successful. So I think, again, Agile taps into this, and although we perhaps see the more micro version of this within each of the teams, I think you can pull out the whole idea of sort of T-shaped people and self-directed teams and roll it into a much wider narrative about why Agile is actually good for the organisation. So let's start with this understanding that if you have a self-directed team, the one thing that's going to have to happen is there's going to have to be some flexibility about how they contribute to each other's work, because they've all got the same goal. They've got a deadline at the end of the sprint. They understand the work that they're supposed to deliver at the end of the sprint. And they are the team that's going to deliver that. And so there might be some specialists who are very quick at certain aspects of the work. But if at any point, let's say testing becomes a bottleneck because the highly skilled testing resource just simply cannot get through all of it, well, there are others in the team who might not be as good or as quick, but they still have some understanding, because part of what we do with Agile is we're trying to build up that wider, that T shape, the top of the T. We're trying to build up that wider sort of ability so that they can collaborate and help each other when the going gets tough, because at the end of the day, everyone's hitting the same deadline. So I think there is something in there about Agile giving us a mechanism that says we don't want to be a silo-based organisation. We don't want to be a sort of, we're all in our own little boxes with our own expertise. Actually, to get work done, what we need to do is work together. And if I'm not that good at something you're very good at least I should build an awareness of it and have some understanding. So that if the going gets tough, I can help you out at some point. So what we should end up with in a more agile environment is lots of teams who become very, very good within their own teams of sharing information and building up skills, which gives us a much wider platform of talented individuals with quite a broad skill base that we can then deploy across the organisation as we see fit. This actually taps into something much wider, which is that in the last few years, a lot of organisations reacted to the financial crisis by slimming down their various layers of management. I know retailers who've got rid of 4 or 5 levels of management, so that you jump from somebody who's perhaps on the tills to somebody who's managing the whole store very, very quickly. That's a very cost-effective thing for organisations to have done, but it does mean that if you are joining an organisation and you're looking for a career path, there isn't much of one. There isn't the old-fashioned hierarchy of, well, if I do a good job, I'll get promoted, because actually those promotions don't exist, because those additional levels of management simply don't exist. So for those of us who are sort of now trying to build career paths for millennials as we attract them in from college and university, it's very difficult to say, well, I'm sorry, I can't give you a sort of well-worked-out career path here. We feel, because we've gone through the costs of hiring these people, that we're signing our own death warrant, because we know if we're not careful, we won't be able to hold on to them for more than a couple of years. So we'll spend the money actually hiring them, which can be significant, not just the fees we pay to recruiters, but also the amount of time we spend in interviews, the amount of time that we have to actually induct people, and the time that it takes for their productivity to get up to speed. It's a very costly thing when we're hiring people, and we're not looking to get rid of people. But this T-shaped approach, I think, can give us an insight into how we can build 21st century career paths, because what we're saying to people is that one of the things you can get to do here is you can get to widen your expertise. So instead of having a very thin sort of vertical line in the T, you actually have quite a fat one, because they've built up a wider and wider and wider base of expertise. So what we can offer is we can offer secondment, we can offer sort of buddy training within teams, we can offer training and coaching to build up the skill set. So what I think we can offer people is, well, actually you won't be pigeonholed into the same job, you'll be we're going to get you up to sort of the multitasking level, so that you'll have a more varied career here, and hopefully something that'll be far more of interest to you. So I think that, again, Agile gives us some answers at a much wider level that is relevant for some of the challenges we're facing at senior management level, because one of the big challenges is how do we recruit and how do we retain people. And I think if you start to say, well, we offer lots of self-directed working, we offer lots of empowered teams, we delegate authority to you, we encourage you and we support you in widening your skill set, we encourage you to challenge if you think that what you're being asked to work on isn't adding real value and it's not what the customer wants. Well, that's actually a very attractive place if you're hiring millennials, for them to work. Frankly, I think we are in a war for talent in many organisations where we're actually trying to hire the brightest and the best. We've got to have something we can offer them in exchange. So, yeah, Agile, I think, is a winner on many fronts, to be fair. So we've actually looked at how do we sort of be empathetic in terms of how do we align back to the wider corporate objectives, how do we align it back to the genuine sort of leadership concerns, and then how do we align it back to this building of a wider capability. I've been talking for about 40 minutes. Don't worry, I'm going to sort of stop in the next few minutes and hopefully take some of your questions. The last thing I'll talk about is I think that I do an awful lot of transformational change work. Agile is often the transformation that I'm being asked to deliver, and it's recognising that it is a massive cultural change. It's a new way of working. And I think that those who are closest to working in agile ways can actually sort of really get to grips with the sort of the just-in-time planning approach, being an empowered team, working in sprints, doing daily stand-ups. I think there's an awful lot of stuff in Agile which is relatively straightforward to use, it's easy to get up and running, and if you've got an agreement to run your project in an Agile way, everybody's happy. I'm always concerned that if we're sort of changing the culture of the organisation, and the wider narrative I've been talking about today, I think is a part of that, well, I want to make sure that we don't leave our senior management teams behind, that they don't feel disenfranchised. And I think that it's about nudging them towards a more agile approach, because actually their work is probably not managed in a particularly agile way. So what they're doing is they're sponsoring agile development, agile creation within all sorts of different teams, all sorts of different projects, but their work, which is very much at the senior sort of stakeholder engagement, it's very much at the strategic planning, it is not always lending itself to a sort of agile structure that is easy for them to recognise. So I think we have to think about how can we help them sort of come into the agile fold. I think there's some emotional pitches that we can make that is about sort of making them feel either sort of very special because they're actually doing the right thing. So they're moving towards Agile from a very positive view, which is that, do you know what, other organisations have moved here and have got a lot of benefit from doing this. This is something that, you know, will be helpful and solves a lot of problems. So in that way, they're sort of walking towards Agile in a very voluntary way. But I think also emotionally we can create an impression that if you don't get on this particular bandwagon, that your organisation is being left behind. I think therefore what you have to do is be prepared to sort of talk about how Agile is the best fit for the fast-moving world where change is a constant. Change is not a sort of a program we gear ourselves up for over the next couple of years and then everything will return back to normal. So where change is the norm and change is fast-paced, Agile is the sort of the right answer, but you can point out a lot of other organisations who perhaps come to that conclusion, and that if we don't, we'll be left behind. And I think therefore you have to arm yourself with an awful lot of research and case studies of successful adoptions of Agile approaches. And I think there's an awful lot, my current favourites by the way, I think McKinsey are writing very persuasively in this space at the moment. I think they've done an awful lot of surveys and I think they've got some really good information. So do look out for the McKinsey quarterly because I think it will give you, if you go online and have a look, it will give you some really interesting stuff that McKinsey have done. I think the Harvard Business Review is okay, but I think McKinsey's impressed me a lot more in the last year on this subject. I think the other thing we can do to nudge people towards a greater acceptance and a greater use of at the senior level, use of Agile, is nudge them sort of more procedurally. So perhaps sort of some of the things that are simpler to adopt across any type of work, like having a daily stand-up or a daily scrum, maybe putting progress reporting into a burn down chart, using Kanban charts to sort of show visually, very visually, where we are what the scope of the work is that we're working on and how much of it is done and how much of it's in progress. I think there's quite a lot of those procedures that, you know, actually they can apply to anything. And I use Kanban as a way of sort of organising my own household and all the things that need doing. And I think you can sort of show that some of these techniques aren't just special to a very particular kind of IT project, but they are sort of really sensible management techniques. And, you know, in that way you can bring your senior management community into the fold. I think it's also really important to make it easy for executives to visit your areas and let them know when you're having stand-ups or retrospectives. I took a very senior finance director, well, the finance director is senior as well, but he's highly respected in his organisation, he's deputy CEO, and I did an Agile briefing one-to-one for a couple of hours with him, and I didn't know what he wanted to know because I didn't know what he knew, so we did start with the premise of don't assume anything. Anyway, about 2/3 of the way through the conversation, I started to talk about Kanban, which he'd heard about, had no idea what it was. And I sort of took him through a Kanban chart. We played with some Postit Notes, and I moved things around a bit. And he felt so empowered because he goes, oh, that's what all those fluttering Postit Notes in the office are all about, aren't they? Right, I understand this now. And he'd been sort of avoiding going down to see some of the Agile teams because he felt, I don't really know what they're up to and I'm going to look stupid. So he basically stayed in his own office. And he demanded sort of the progress reporting that he's always had, which is lots of text and lots of summary of who's been doing what, whether or not we're on budget and on time. But from that sort of empowered moment, he's now felt a lot more confident to sort of go down and have a look. I had another success recently where I was trying to explain how I've allocated my time to various initiatives for an organisation that I'm working with. So I drew it in I sort of typed it up, not as in just I spent this many days on this and this many days on this, but I looked at the package of days that they'd given me to get the work done and I drew it as a burn down chart and actually showed how I've still got a few days left and what I'm expecting to spend those last few days on. And they really loved that. Oh, that's great. I really get that. That's really helpful. I can get cut to the chase and see right at the bottom there just what's left and what we can use you for. And I thought, that's another simple Agile technique, but it makes all the difference. So I think there's some nudging we can do, as well as sort of more direct selling messages. Well, I hate those webinars, by the way, that go over the hour, because I don't know about you, but I've allocated an absolute maximum of an hour and I want people to use it properly. We can't run late, can we? That would fly in the face of Agile. So hopefully I'm going to turn to my favourite people behind the screens here and see if they can tell me what some of the questions are and see if I can sort of see what's coming on. So I'm going to try and read out some of those. How do you control things so that they don't become a perpetual project? And it says time stroke money question mark. Well, I think one of this is quite a wide subject really, because I think there are two streams of Agile. There's Agile Development, which is a continuous improvement cycle where teams are working off of a backlog and the product owner is continually grooming that backlog. And the teams pick up some of the backlog, they run a sprint, they deliver some improvements, and it might be to an existing platform or to an existing product, and then for the next sprint they do exactly the same, and it's a continuous cycle. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I can see from the question here that it's probably about a perpetual project. I don't think there's anything wrong with that as long as we recognise that that's continuous improvement. And possibly what we're looking at here is that continuous improvement is building the, well, if we use the Scaled Agile Framework wording for a minute, it's building the architectural runway. In other methods we might say that it's addressing the technical debt or it's delivering enablers. But if it's about this continuous improvement of an existing platform or product range, I think that's fine, as long as it's seen like that, and therefore it's positioned as business as usual. But on the other side, I think that if you have got an initiative that must be delivered by a certain date, and I think that is a critical question, you have to ask the business, what's the time frame that's really important for you? Then we must treat that with respect, and we must actually use Agile project management, and that's why I like the Agile PM qualification from Agile Business Consortium, because I actually think it gives a really good Agile approach to project management, and that's different to Scrum, which is a great Agile approach for Agile development, and I think we shouldn't confuse the two. So if we need to make sure we put some controls and some governance in place and treat their piece of work as a project, then let's do that, and let's use Agile project management for that. So that will be my answer. Behind the scenes, are there any more questions? I'm struggling to see my screen. So hang on a second, see if I can go up. Yeah, there's a few more here. Oh gosh, there's lots. Let me go right to the top. A very tiny screen in which I can see it. Some people saying that they were getting confused about DSDM and the Agile Business Consortium, so yes, now we know. Somebody here's got an Agile, a PM Agile and a Prince 2 Agile, assuming they also count as Agile qualifications. Yes, I think you've raised an interesting point there though. There are lots of different brands of Agile, and I think if you're selling to senior managers, you have to sort of put that in a wider narrative and sort of explain that actually they're not interested in any particular brand. They're just sort of saying, was this an Agile approach or not? So I think that's quite an important one to sort of actually get to grips with. Don't get stuck in a particular brand. Let's just have a look at the next question. Business doesn't like multiple implementations as it disrupts the operation of the business, or only want a large chunk of the solution to make it worthwhile. Well, I think one of the things, you're right, businesses I think there is a genuine concern from the business about this idea around collaboration and how much time project work will take up, particularly if we're talking about early return on investment and drip feeding through our project deliverables, and the business are going, oh, for heaven's sake, every time we have to work in a new way because you've given us something else, it's really disruptive to our productivity. I think this is when we start to get into a more hybrid approach, because I'm certainly working with several organisations who said, from a business perspective, they said, we're happy to support Agile development, we're happy to support the fact that you're creating things and that you're testing them out and signing them off as done and then building something else on top of that. And we're not saying we only want one single delivery at the end of the project, but what we are saying is that we're going to give you release windows, we're going to give you times when it is okay to give us things and we can start working in new ways, and there are times when it isn't. And I think we can all work in an Agile way and do it that way and still satisfy our business by not continually sort of bothering them, because I think that's how they see it. We see it as valuable collaboration. I think it's probably one of the biggest sticking points, and I think you have to have a very open and very honest conversation at the start about how much availability does the business have to work in alongside the project team? What is the flow of business and the timetable of business in that particular area that's going to be affected by the project? Are there key dates? Are there key expectations about how things are organised? Retailers work on sort of festivals throughout the year. We have Christmas and Easter and the summer barbecue season. Universities have their terms and when students are coming back or not. Other businesses are much more controlled by their financial quarters, particularly if they're very much a sales organisation. So getting to know the timetable for the business and respecting that and saying, well, how can you work with us and how can we deliver to a timetable that works for you? That doesn't mean that we shouldn't do incremental delivery throughout the project lifecycle, but it has to be sympathetic to those that we're actually delivering to, I think. So there we go. Hopefully that gave you some ideas about how we're going to do things, and for those of you who are listening to the recording, feel absolutely free to contact me and sort of pick me up through LinkedIn or you can also email me, but I do quite a lot of LinkedIn, and if you want to link in with me, that's fine, because I put out lots of updates and lots of additional material all of the time, and I will be sort of including a download of this document that's gone on my website, so that makes it nice and easy for you to follow up what's been said. So it's not just slides, you can actually see all the text behind it, because I wrote it all out longhand, so I had some idea of what I was going to say. I hope that helps, and many thanks for listening.